Hello guys, this is Ms. Brito here. Today you guys are going to learn how to compute theoretical and experimental probabilities. So for this last unit, you guys will learn a little bit about probabilities and we'll just go into what theoretical and experimental probabilities are. But first, I have a few vocabulary key points that I would like you to understand before we go ahead and start computing. You need to understand what do I mean by probability. So the first bullet point says that probability is how likely an event is to occur. And when we're writing down the probability, it's usually going to be the number of possible ways that you're interested in divided by the total number of possible outcomes, which is always going to be your denominator. So again, it's just like what is the chances or probability of raining today. That could be a fraction, or it could be a fraction that you can turn into a percentage. But again, probability is just the chances of something happening or not happening. Okay. When we talk about theoretical probability, though, in theory, when we're finding probability, when we refer to the theoretical probability, it's really, again, it's going to be the number of times an event occurs out of the total number of trials. So it's still a fraction, but it's basically what we expect to happen based on theory or based on something that we might know, not based on an experiment that we're conducting ourselves. Now, if we're doing an experimental probability, then that is what actually happens when you do the experiment. And I'm going to just do a quick example here to demonstrate what I mean by theoretical and experimental probabilities and how you write them down. So here it says, example 1, what is the theoretical? And we're also going to find the experimental. What is the theoretical probability of getting tails when a coin is thrown? So if I were to throw a coin up, the first thing I'm going to do is think about what are my possible solutions. And I have steps here. The first step is to identify the total amount of possible outcomes, which is going to be always your denominator. So the big number is always your denominator, and that's all the total outcomes. So I know I have only 2 outcomes, and the 2 outcomes is going to be my total. So my total for step 1 is, I'm going to write down total. The total is going to be definitely either head or tail. Those are my only 2 possible outcomes. So 2 possible outcomes. That's the total. And it says here that my denominator, the total will always be my denominator. But I like to identify first because sometimes you have to add a bunch of different outcomes. And it's important to know that your denominator is the biggest number. Now, the second step is to identify the outcome that you want, or basically what they're asking you for. They want me to know what is the probability of getting tails if I were to throw the coin once. Tails is just 1 out of 2, right? So again, for step 2, I want 1 tail. And if I wanted to actually name my 2 possible outcomes, again, that would be tail or head. And what I want is a tail. So then I'm going to write it down as a fraction. On the last step is to write it down as a fraction. Is the possible ways that I can get tails. If I throw it, it's just going to be 1 time. It's going to be one tail out of 2 possible outcomes. And I can turn that fraction into a percentage. You can use your calculator really quick. If you divide it 1 by 2, you're going to see that that's 0.5, which is the same thing as 50%. So sometimes they ask you for fractions, or sometimes you have to turn those fractions into percentage. It's the same thing. So now I want you guys to find on your own the possibility or the probability of getting tails if you were to do an actual experimental probability, or what is the probability of throwing it. And for experimental, guys, you have to try it a few times. So I want you to go on your own and see if it's true that the chances you're going to be 1/2. Maybe not all the time. If you do it only like 5 times or so, it's not going to be really always 1/2 or 1/2. Sometimes it might be 60% or 70%, but if you keep doing it so many times, if you keep experimenting, eventually it gets really close to 50%. If you do the experiment yourself. So go ahead and throw a coin and see if you get close to 50%. So the experimental is what actually happens when you do the experiment, but they get really close to the actual theoretical probability. So now go ahead, guys, and do your IXL work, which is just finding the theoretical probability of certain outcomes. Good luck with your work, and remember, it is worth 2 double grades. Okay, so do all your work on IXL, and I will grade it twice.